Hello everyone and welcome back. In this video, I want to provide you with an introduction to Xcode and beginning to write Swift code in Xcode. So Xcode is an integrated development environment, or IDE, developed by Apple. It's used for writing apps for iOS, macOS, watchOS, etc. So go ahead and open up your Mac and let's get started by opening up Xcode. An easy way to open Xcode is to hit Command Spacebar to open up the Spotlight search. Here you can just type in any program or file or folder you want to search for on your machine. So let's type in Xcode and press Enter. This is really similar to just hitting the Windows key on a Windows machine and then beginning to type to search your machine. This is the kind of welcome page or splash screen for Xcode. If you have any recent projects, you can see them on the right and click on them to open. There's three main options for getting started with Xcode. We're going to choose this second one here, create a new Xcode project. This is going to take us through a little wizard in order to set up our new project. So Xcode first wants us to choose a template, kind of what is our platform we're developing for. So at the top, if you're developing an iOS app, you would probably click iOS. For this simple introduction to Xcode and Swift, we're going to keep things simple and choose the macOS tab and the command line tool application. So this is going to allow us to make a simple text-based console app, similar to what you would do when getting started with, say, C++ or Java or Python. We're going to need to give this a product name, so let's call it Swift Basics Fun. Make sure you have an organization identifier in here. com.example is just a really easy one to get started, or perhaps a reverse domain name that represents you or your organization. For your language, choose Swift. Choose a place to store this new project. Be sure to check this box to create a Git repository on my Mac to place this new folder under version control. And then click Create. This can take a few seconds and sometimes up to a minute or more in order to create your new project. Up at the top, you'll see the toolbar in Xcode, and in the middle is your status bar. This is going to show you a little message about what Xcode is doing. So you saw it said indexing with a progress bar, and now it says finished. So it looks like we are ready to start working with Xcode because Xcode is ready for us. All right, let's go through an overview of the different parts of Xcode. So beginning with the top, this whole gray panel here is called the toolbar. Above the toolbar is the menu bar, where you can choose, the standard menu options like File, Edit, View, Help, etc. I think what's important up here is two things. One, under Xcode, you'll see preferences. A lot of times you'll be looking for something in Xcode, and a good place to start is preferences. The keyboard shortcut for all these different menu items is usually in the side of the menu item entry. So like Command, comma, will open up preferences. If you head over to product, for example, you'll see to run your product or your project, Command R will launch it. So this is just two kind of nice things to know about where the preferences are. And then if you ever kind of want to know the keyboard shortcut for something you might be commonly doing up in the menu bar, just look to the right of that entry and find out what the shortcut is. All right, so this is the toolbar. This is the status bar. Here we've got some icons like build. Okay, so this is the same as Command R, stop, and then we've got some different options for the build scheme. Okay, don't worry too much about this for now. Over on the right side, we have some more icons. So we'll come back to these icons here in a moment, but if you just hover over them, they'll give you a hint about what they do. These three right here are kind of helpful. All right. So on the left side of Xcode is this panel or this pane over here, which is called your Navigator Pane or your Navigator Area. So you can see there's a bunch of icons because there's a lot of different navigators. You can just click on them to check them out. The first one that we're always shown is the default, the project navigator, where you can see an overview of your project, right? So we have Swift Basics Fun that has a folder called Swift Basics Fun, and inside of that folder is a file called main.swift. Let's double click on main.swift and we will see main.swift show up. So this is a basic Swift file that Xcode has created for us with some very simple boilerplate code, an import statement, and a print statement. So the editor is where you're going to do the majority of your work, writing, editing, etc., your code. At the top of the editor is the jump bar, where you can choose kind of like different levels of how you got where you are. So like, for example, we're in main.swift, which we can see is in Swift Basics Fun, which we can see is in the project Swift Basics Fun. So as your projects get larger, this is kind of helpful to use the jump bar in order to jump around. Later in the video, I'm also going to show you how you can create labels to divide your code, and then you'll be able to use the jump bar to move throughout your current file. So right now we see the jump bar says no selection, but soon we'll be able to add different selections to jump around our file. All right, so just to recap, we have the project navigator showing up here, but we have a number of other navigators like the source control navigator, the issues navigator. This one's kind of important. And then we have the editor here. So, quick way to close this sidebar over here, the navigator, in order to make more room for your editor, is to use the upper left icon here with the kind of green sidebar on the left side. See how it says hide or show the navigator? Well, we can make our editor bigger by hiding the navigator. A nice keyboard shortcut to do this is Command 0. That will also hide and show the navigator. If you want to quickly flip between different navigators, you can just look at what icon or which navigator you want and its order. So if I want to see the project navigator, it's the first icon. So Command 1 is going to jump me there. This next one is the source control navigator. It's the second icon. Command 2 is going to jump me there. All right, now let's move over to the right side of Xcode. So over here we have the utilities pane, and the utilities pane shows different inspectors. And the inspectors that you can see over here are going to be dependent on kind of what your editor or your main area in the center of Xcode is showing. So right now, you can see there are 3 different inspectors: the file inspector, the history inspector, and the quick help inspector. If I click back over here on the editor, you can see another one showed up here called the attributes inspector. So all of these different inspectors will show up based on, like I said, what you're doing kind of in the center of Xcode. They're nice graphical user interface approaches to modify some properties or some settings or add some items, etc. We don't need to worry too much about this over here just getting started with Swift, but you can see you could change the name of the file in the file inspector, for example. As you can probably guess, we can hide the utilities pane in our current inspector by clicking on this hide or show the inspectors icon. Of course, there's a keyboard shortcut to do it as well, which is Command Option 0. All right, there's one more area to show you, which is this bottom one called the Debug Area, which isn't currently being shown, but I can click here and show it. I can also run my program with Command R or by hitting the play button over here, and the debug area will pop up with my output on the right. All right, here's my output over here. If I want, I can use Command-Shift-Y as a keyboard shortcut to show or hide the debug area. The debug area also has kind of its own panels, and you can see that you can hide or show the panels in the bottom right, these icons here. All right, what do we have left to show? Well, let's make a change to our file. Let's just add another print statement. And let's save the file. We're going to see an M show up next to main.swift, the file I just modified in the project navigator, representing this file has been modified. So recall that we checked a box when we created this project saying, yes, let's initialize a Git repository in this folder. Well, that means the Git is now tracking all of our changes in this folder, which is awesome because Xcode is integrated with Git and we'll be able to see those changes in the project Navigator. There's an entire source control Navigator where you can play with things like branches, remotes, etc. So I wanted to make this change not just to show you that Git and Xcode are tracking changes in your files, but also to show you the version control editor. So if you ever want to see what the difference is between your current version of a file and the most recently committed version of the file, then you can come over here to the version control editor and be able to see the differences side by side. So that's really helpful. Down here you see this is the local revision on master, and then here we have the commit identifier and the date and the author of the most recent commit for our last commit of this file. The last icon to show up here in the toolbar is the library, and you can click on it and you'll just see you have a search bar where you can search for some code to insert or some objects to insert, all sorts of fun things. I'm not going to worry about that for now. These are really, really helpful once you start to, say, write some iOS code. But for our simple Swift introduction today, we don't need to use any code snippets from the library. All right, so that concludes our overview of the different parts of Xcode. And now it's time to write a little bit of Swift code. So let's start in main.swift by going over comments in Swift. So the double slash, just like in C++ and Java, is a one-line comment. A star and a slash together are a multi-line comment, also just like in C++ and Java. So nothing too radically new here. Next, I want to show you the use of a mark. So if you write mark : dash, and then some sort of label like variables representing this area of the code is going to introduce you to variables in Swift, then you can effectively make a divider and a label in your code, which is really cool. So if I click up here in my mark variables, you can see now my jump bar is showing me where I'm at inside of my Swift file. So this is just kind of a nice way to document and organize your code. All right, so as you can guess, I'm going to introduce you to variables in Swift. So first, every type in Swift is an object, okay? This is a little different than what you might be used to from, say, Java or C++, where you have objects and you have primitives, right? So primitives in C++ and Java would be like ints and floats and chars. Well, there's ints and floats and chars in Swift as well, but they're objects. They're not primitives. So this means Swift has no primitives. So for example, let's say I have the number 1. I could use the member selection operator, the dot, on that primitive literal 1 and see that there are methods and variables or properties associated with this int, right? This syntax is really similar to what you would do in Java and C++ in order to access any members of an object class, right? So that's kind of cool. All right, let's declare a variable. So let's declare a variable called temperature. So I'm going to use the keyword var to denote I'm declaring a variable. Here's the name of my variable. And then colon space, the type of my variable. Let's say this is the temperature outside. Let's say it is sunny and 75, which it for the most part is where I'm at. And now I have a variable called temperature. I can print out temperature, Command R to run this program, and I'm going to see 75 printed out. Now, I was very explicit to Swift. This is the type I want the variable temperature to be, but I can let Swift infer types. So let's say I have another variable. I'll call it just temperature2. And let's say this one is a little bit more precise. I'm not going to have a colon and the type. I'm just going to assign it, say, 74. can build and run this. And Swift can look at this initialized value and say, okay, temperature 2 should be an int. If I maybe make it 74.9, then this is going to be a float. So what are some of the different types of variables that we can declare just right out of the box? Well, you've got your standard ones like int, float, double, bool, etc. And then a little bit more, I don't want to say complicated ones because they're not complicated, but just a little bit more advanced ones like character, string, array, set, dictionary, etc. There are a lot of different types that you can start working with, and they're types that you're familiar with from previous programming languages. All right, so let's try working with a string, and let's declare this string to be a constant. So you're going to use the keyword let to declare a constant. So let's say let month be assigned September. Today is September 1st. So it seems fitting to declare a variable to store September. I might also declare another variable called day, and I'll assign it 1. Today is September 1st. Now, if I were to try and say change day to be 2 and then build, this isn't going to work. So we have our first compiler error. Okay, we've got a kind of a red stop sign here. Up in our status bar, we've got a red stop sign here. If I click on it, it's going to take me to the Issues Navigator, where I'm going to see all of the errors and warnings for my project. So essentially it's saying, cannot assign a value, day is a let constant. Okay, that makes sense. Let's delete that. All right, let's go ahead and print out our month, just showing that we can print out a string. And now what we're going to do is we're going to do a little example of string interpolation. So this is just a nice little way in order to create a string or print out a string using values from variables. So kind of like building a parameterized string. So let's say I want to print something like today is, and then I'm going to have my month and my day. So say today is September 1. Okay, so the slash parens are going to be placeholders for parameterized values, where at runtime, the actual value that's stored in month and the actual value that's stored in day are going to be inserted to create this string that is then printed out. All right, I've got a little task for you to try. So go ahead and declare 2 constants, one for your first name and one for your last name. Print on one line your first name space your last name has, and then the number of characters that are in your first and last name. So for example, my first name is Gina, my last name is Sprint. I have 4 letters in my first name and 6 letters in my last name. So my statement should say Gina Sprint has 10 characters. But here's the key. I don't want you to count and then hard code this number. I want you to figure out how many characters are in your name based on your 2 constants, okay? So remember when I showed you, you could have some sort of identifier like the number 1 and dot, and you'll be able to see all the different members that are associated with that type. We'll go ahead and try that with your string variables or your string constants and see if you can come up with a way to do this automatically. All right, so here's my solution. My first name is Gina. My last name is Sprint. And I'm just gonna have another variable here called numchars, where I'm going to assign it the count of the number of characters in first name. So I'm gonna type first name dot, and I'm gonna be able to just start typing to search and see if there's anything like related to the count of the number of characters. And it looks like there is an integer variable called count. So I'm going to add the count of first name to the count of last name. Now I'm going to use my print statement with that fun string interpolation that I showed you in order to print out my message. And there it is. Gina Sprint has 10 characters. All right. Well, this is going to conclude our introduction to Xcode and starting to write Swift code in Xcode. Hopefully you learned a lot. There's obviously a lot more than just variables in Swift. So we will pick it up from there in a future video or future lesson. All right. Thanks for watching.